The dusty streets of Calico, California stretched out before Flora Crawford like a canvas of broken dreams. Each step through the silver mining town, a reminder that beauty was a currency she could never spend. It was the summer of 1885, and the heat shimmered off the desert floor in waves that made the ramshackle buildings dance like mirages. Flora had arrived on the morning stage, her meager belongings wrapped in a threadbare shawl, seeking work as a seamstress in a town that promised opportunities for those willing to work hard enough. She had no family left after the fever took her parents last winter in San Francisco, and the boarding house where she had been staying made it clear that, without income, she would soon be on the streets. At 21 years old, Flora had learned to keep her eyes down and her expectations lower, convinced that her plain features and unremarkable brown hair marked her as someone destined to fade into the background of other people's stories. The advertisement she clutched in her hand promised employment at the general store, mending clothes and sewing curtains for the townsfolk who had neither the time nor the skill to do it themselves. Flora pushed open the door to Garrison's general store, the bell above jingling to announce her presence. A portly man with mutton chops and suspenders looked up from behind the counter, his expression souring the moment he saw her. "Help you?" His tone suggested he would rather not. "I am here about the seamstress position," Flora said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I have experience with all manner of sewing, from simple repairs to wedding dresses." Mr. Garrison looked her up and down, his lip curling slightly. "Was hoping for someone with a bit more presentation. Customers like a pleasant face to go with their purchases." He waved his hand dismissively. "But I suppose you will do for the backroom work. $2 a week and you find your own lodging. Start tomorrow at dawn." Flora swallowed the humiliation that burned in her throat and nodded. "Thank you, sir. I will be here." She left the store with employment secured, but her spirit bruised, the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on her shoulders like a lead shawl. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose, colors that seemed to mock her with their beauty. Flora needed to find somewhere to stay before nightfall, and she wandered the main street looking for a boarding house that might accept her limited funds. "Careful there." A voice rang out, and Flora jerked backward as a horse and rider thundered past, kicking up a cloud of dust that coated her dress and filled her mouth with grit. The rider pulled his mount to a stop and wheeled around, trotting back toward her. "My apologies, miss. Are you hurt?" Flora coughed and waved away the dust, looking up to see a man dismounting from a magnificent chestnut stallion. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor, wearing a dark brown vest over a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see dark hair and a strong jawline covered in a day's worth of stubble. What struck her most was the genuine concern in his voice. "I am fine," Flora managed, brushing ineffectually at her dress. "No harm done." The man stepped closer, and she could see his eyes now, a startling shade of green that reminded her of the valleys she had glimpsed from the stagecoach. "Quincy Foster," he said, extending his hand. "I own a ranch about 5 miles north of town. I was riding too fast, and that was inexcusable. Please let me make amends by buying you dinner at the hotel restaurant." Flora stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a snake that might bite. "That is not necessary, Mr. Foster. Truly, I am unharmed." "Maybe not, but I would feel considerably better about nearly running you down if you would allow me to at least ensure you get a decent meal." He smiled, and the warmth of it caught her off guard. "I do not make a habit of terrorizing newcomers to Calico. How did you know I am new to town?" Flora asked, finally accepting his handshake with a brief, awkward grip. Because Calico is small enough that I would have noticed you before, Quincy said simply. And because you have the look of someone trying to figure out where everything is. Flora felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked down at her dust-covered boots. I arrived this morning. I have just secured employment at the general store. Then you definitely deserve a meal that is not hardtack and jerky, Quincy said. Come on. The hotel serves a passable stew, and the biscuits are actually quite good. Something in his easy manner made Flora agree, though warning bells rang in her mind about accepting invitations from strange men. But she was hungry and tired, and the thought of a hot meal was too tempting to refuse. She walked beside him as he led his horse down the street toward the Calico Hotel, a two-story building that looked considerably more substantial than most of the structures in town. The restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps that cast a golden glow as the evening shadows lengthened. Quincy held out a chair for Flora, a gesture of courtesy that made her uncomfortable because it felt unearned. She sat gingerly, folding her hands in her lap as he took the seat across from her and signaled to the waitress. 2 of your beef stews, Marion, and a basket of those biscuits, Quincy ordered. And coffee, please. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, nodded and headed toward the kitchen. Flora sat in awkward silence, unsure what to say to this stranger who was being inexplicably kind to her. She snuck glances at him from beneath her lashes, taking in the weathered quality of his hands and the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often and squinted into the sun. "How long have you owned your ranch?" Flora asked, grasping for conversation. "Going on 6 years now," Quincy replied, leaning back in his chair with the ease of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Started with nothing but a plot of land and a dream of raising the finest horses in California. It has been hard work, but I have got about 50 head now and a reputation for quality that brings buyers from as far as Los Angeles." "That sounds like a good life," Flora said softly. "It is," Quincy agreed, "though it can be lonely. The ranch is just me and 3 hired hands. We work sunup to sundown, and there is not much time for socializing." He paused as Marion returned with steaming bowls of stew and a basket wrapped in cloth. "But enough about me. What brings you to Calico, Miss Crawford, Flora Crawford?" She picked up her spoon, the aroma of the stew making her stomach clench with hunger. "I needed work, and San Francisco had nothing to offer. The mining towns are always looking for seamstresses, or so I was told. You have family here?" Quincy asked, breaking open a biscuit and slathering it with butter. Flora shook her head. "No family anywhere. My parents passed last winter and I have no siblings. It is just me." Something shifted in Quincy's expression, a softening that made her look away. Pity was something she had learned to recognize and despise. She ate her stew in silence for a moment, savoring the rich flavor and the warmth that spread through her chest. "I am sorry for your loss," Quincy said quietly. "That must be difficult, facing the world alone." "It is what it is," Flora replied, her voice flat. "Many people have far worse circumstances." "That does not make yours any easier to bear," Quincy observed. "Have you found lodging yet?" "Not yet. I was looking when you nearly trampled me," Flora said, allowing a small smile to touch her lips. Quincy had the grace to look sheepish. "Mrs. Henley runs a boarding house 2 streets over. She is fair with her prices and keeps a clean establishment. Tell her I sent you and she will treat you right." "Thank you," Flora said. "You have been very kind, Mr. Foster." "Quincy, please," he said. "Mr. Foster makes me sound like my father, and that is not a comparison I enjoy." They finished their meal with conversation that flowed more easily than Flora expected. Quincy told her about the challenges of ranching in the desert, the constant battle for water, and the satisfaction of training a wild horse to accept a saddle. Flora found herself talking about her love of sewing, the way fabric and thread could transform into something beautiful and useful, the meditation she found in the steady rhythm of her needle. When they stepped back out into the cooling evening air, Quincy walked her to Mrs. Henley's boarding house, leading his horse by the reins. The building was modest but well-maintained, with flower boxes in the windows that spoke of someone who cared about creating beauty even in this harsh landscape. "I hope I will see you again, Miss Crawford," Quincy said, tipping his hat. "Calico is a small town. Our paths are bound to cross." "Perhaps," Flora said, though she could not imagine why a successful rancher would have any reason to seek out the company of a plain seamstress. "Thank you again for the meal and your kindness." She watched him swing up into his saddle with easy grace, the horse responding to the lightest touch of his heels. He rode off into the gathering darkness, and Flora stood for a moment on the boarding house steps, wondering if she had imagined the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. Mrs. Henley proved to be a plump, cheerful widow who asked few questions and offered a small room on the second floor for $1.50 per week, meals included. Flora counted out her precious coins, knowing she would need to be very careful with her money until she received her first wages. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was clean and private, and Flora sank onto the mattress with relief. That night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of Calico settling into sleep, the distant laughter from the saloons, the barking of dogs, the whisper of desert wind against the windows. She thought about green eyes and a warm smile and told herself not to be foolish. Men like Quincy Foster did not look twice at women like her. He had been kind because he felt guilty about nearly running her down, nothing more. Tomorrow she would start her new job, and she would build a life here through hard work and determination, not through impossible daydreams. Flora reported to Garrison's general store at dawn, where she was shown to a cramped back room filled with bags of grain and crates of supplies. A small table with a lamp served as her workstation, and Mr. Garrison dumped a pile of torn shirts and worn trousers in front of her with instructions to make them presentable. "And do not take all day about it," he grumbled. "I need these back on the shelves by next week." Flora set to work, her needle flashing in the lamplight as she repaired seams and patched holes. The work was tedious but familiar, and she lost herself in it, grateful for the distraction. She was halfway through the pile when the bell above the front door jangled, and she heard Mr. Garrison's tone change from surly to obsequious. "Mr. Foster, what brings you to town today? Here to pick up your order." Flora's hand stilled on the shirt she was mending, her heart beating faster at the sound of Quincy's voice. "That, and I need some supplies for the ranch," Quincy replied. "Also wanted to see if your new seamstress could do some work for me. I have got curtains that need replacing and a couple of shirts that need mending." Of course," Mr. Garrison said, his voice oozing false warmth. "Let me just fetch her." He appeared in the doorway to the back room, his expression sharp. "Miss Crawford, Mr. Foster has some work for you. Come out here and discuss it with him." Flora set down her needle and smoothed her dress, her palms suddenly damp. She stepped into the main store to find Quincy leaning against the counter, his hat in his hands. He straightened when he saw her, and his face broke into a smile that made her stomach flutter in a way she did not quite understand. "Miss Crawford," he said, "I hope you are settling in well." "I am, thank you," Flora replied, keeping her eyes somewhere around his collar because looking directly at him felt too intense. "Mr. Garrison mentioned you need some sewing done." "If you have the time," Quincy said. I know you have got your hands full here, but I would pay extra for the work. The ranch house is looking pretty shabby, and I could use some help making it more presentable. I can manage, Flora said. What exactly do you need? How about you come out to the ranch and take a look, Quincy suggested. That way you can take measurements and see what needs doing. I could send a wagon for you on Sunday, if you have got the day off. Mr. Garrison inserted himself into the conversation before Flora could respond. Sunday is her free day. I am sure she would be happy to visit your ranch, Mr. Foster. Flora bristled at having her schedule decided for her, but the prospect of additional income was too valuable to refuse. Sunday would be acceptable, she said carefully. What time should I expect the wagon? How about 10 in the morning, Quincy said. That will give you time to sleep in a bit, and we can have lunch at the ranch before I bring you back to town. That is very generous, Flora said, and meant it. I will be ready. Quincy purchased his supplies, chatting easily with Mr. Garrison about the price of feed and the prospects for rain. But Flora noticed that his gaze kept drifting back to where she stood by the doorway to the back room. When he left, tipping his hat to her with that warm smile, Mr. Garrison rounded on her immediately. You have made quite an impression on Mr. Foster, he said, his eyes narrowed with speculation. He is one of the most eligible bachelors in the county. Every unattached woman from here to Barstow has set her cap at him, but he has never shown interest in any of them. He is just being kind, Flora said, retreating to her work table. He needs sewing done, that is all. Mr. Garrison said, unconvinced. Well, do not get any ideas above your station, girl. Men like that marry pretty society women, not plain seamstresses. The words stung because they echoed Flora's own thoughts, but she kept her expression neutral as she picked up her needle again. She would not give Mr. Garrison the satisfaction of seeing that he had hurt her. The days until Sunday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Flora worked steadily through the pile of mending, her fingers occasionally straying to her own worn dresses, wondering if she should attempt to make herself more presentable for the visit to the ranch. But she had no money for new fabric, and her sewing skills could only do so much with the limited materials she had. In the end, she settled for washing her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been her mother's, and braiding her hair in a coronet that at least looked neat if not fashionable. Sunday morning arrived with a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and Flora waited on the steps of the boarding house with her sewing basket and a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Precisely at 10, a wagon rattled up the street driven by a young man with a sunburned face and a friendly grin. Miss Crawford, I am Danny, one of Mr. Foster's hands. He sent me to fetch you to the ranch. Flora climbed up onto the wagon seat, arranging her skirts with careful modesty. Danny kept up a running commentary as they left Calico behind, pointing out landmarks and sharing gossip about the town with the unself-conscious ease of someone who loved to talk. Mr. Foster is a good boss, Danny said as they bounced along the rutted road. Fair wages, decent food, and he does not ask us to do anything he would not do himself. Some of the other ranchers around here treat their hands like dirt, but not him. How long have you worked for him? Flora asked, gripping the side of the wagon as they hit a particularly deep rut. Going on 2 years now, Danny said. I was drifting when he found me, barely 18 and without a skill to my name. He took me on and taught me everything about horses. I owe him a lot. The ranch appeared in the distance, a collection of buildings nestled in a small valley where a creek provided the precious water necessary for survival in this arid landscape. The main house was a low, adobe structure with a wide porch that offered shade from the brutal sun. Corrals stretched out behind it, and Flora could see horses moving in the distance, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. Quincy emerged from the house as the wagon pulled up, and Flora noticed he had changed into a clean shirt and had obviously made an effort to tame his dark hair. He reached up to help her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady on her waist, and Flora felt a jolt of awareness that made her breath catch. "Welcome to the Triple F Ranch," Quincy said, releasing her reluctantly. "Thank you for making the trip out here." "Triple F?" Flora asked, glad for a neutral topic to cover her confusion. "Foster's Fine Fillies," Quincy said with a self-deprecating smile. "I know it is a terrible name, but it was what my father called the place when he first staked the claim. He died before he could build anything more than a lean-to, and I kept the name in his memory." "I think it is a nice tribute," Flora said softly. Quincy showed her around the property, introducing her to the other two ranch hands, both older men who treated her with rough courtesy. The horses were magnificent, and Flora found herself drawn to a gray mare with gentle eyes who nuzzled her hand looking for treats. "That is Silver," Quincy said. "She is one of my favorites, sweet-tempered and smart as a whip." "She is beautiful," Flora said, stroking the mare's neck. "I have not been around horses much. In the city, they were just something that pulled wagons. Out here they are everything," Quincy said. "Transportation, labor, companions. A good horse can mean the difference between life and death in the desert." He led her to the house, and Flora could see immediately what he meant about it needing work. The curtains were sun-faded and moth-eaten, the furniture was serviceable but sparse, and the whole place had the air of a space inhabited only for sleeping and eating. There was no softness, no comfort beyond the basics. "I see what you mean," Flora said, walking through the main room with an assessing eye. "You need curtains for all the windows, and some cushions for those chairs would not go amiss. Perhaps a tablecloth and some proper napkins." "I will defer to your expertise," Quincy said. "Whatever you think will make the place more livable, I trust your judgment. Cost is not a concern within reason." Flora mentally calculated fabric requirements and labor hours, coming up with a figure that made her hesitate. "It would be approximately $30 for materials and my time," she said, bracing for him to balk at the expense. "Sounds fair," Quincy said immediately. "When can you start?" "I will need to order the fabric from San Francisco," Flora said. "It should arrive within 2 weeks, and then I can begin. The work will take me about a month, doing it in my spare time." "No rush," Quincy said. "This house has been neglected for years. Another few weeks would not make much difference." They ate lunch on the porch, simple fare of cold chicken and bread with fresh butter. But Flora thought it tasted better than the fanciest meal she had ever eaten in San Francisco. Quincy talked about his plans for expanding the ranch, his dream of breeding horses that would be sought after throughout the West. Flora found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, about her childhood in San Francisco, her father's gambling debts that had left them poor despite his profession as a clerk, her mother's quiet strength in the face of disappointment. "You have known a lot of hardship," Quincy observed, his green eyes serious. "But you have not let it make you bitter. That takes strength." Flora looked down at her hands, calloused from years of needlework. "I do not know about strength. I just keep moving forward because there is no other option." "That is the very definition of strength," Quincy said gently. "Endurance in the face of adversity." The afternoon sun was slanting toward evening when Danny brought the wagon around to take Flora back to town. She gathered her things, feeling strangely reluctant to leave the peaceful sanctuary of the ranch. Quincy walked her to the wagon, and as she was about to climb up, he caught her hand. "Flora," he said, and the use of her first name sent warmth through her chest. "I hope you will come back often. Not just for the sewing work, but because I enjoy your company." Flora looked up at him, searching his face for signs of mockery or pity, but found only sincerity. "I enjoy your company too," she admitted quietly, "but I do not understand why you would want to spend time with someone like me." "Someone like you," Quincy repeated, his brow furrowing. "What does that mean?" Flora felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she had started this conversation and could not back away now. "I am not. I am plain, Mr. Foster. I have no family, no prospects, no beauty to recommend me. I am just a seamstress trying to survive." Something flashed in Quincy's eyes, an emotion she could not quite name. He released her hand and stepped back. "I see. And you think that matters to me?" "It matters to everyone," Flora said, the old pain welling up despite her efforts to contain it. "It is simply the way of the world." "Maybe the world you have known," Quincy said, "but not mine. I will see you in town, Miss Crawford." The formality in his tone felt like a door closing, and Flora climbed into the wagon with a heavy heart. Danny tried to make conversation on the ride back, but she responded in monosyllables, too tangled up in confusion and regret to focus on his cheerful chatter. What had she expected? That a successful rancher would be interested in a woman who had nothing to offer. She had been right to maintain her distance, to remind both of them of the reality of their situations. But as she lay in her narrow bed that night, Flora could not stop thinking about the way Quincy's hand had felt holding hers, the warmth in his eyes when he smiled at her, the easy comfort of their conversation. She had felt seen in a way she never had before, as if he looked past the plain exterior to something deeper. And she had thrown it back in his face with her self-pity and assumptions. The fabric samples arrived at the general store 10 days later, and Flora spent her evenings sketching designs for the ranch house curtains. She poured her frustration and confusion into the work, determined to create something beautiful for Quincy, even if she had ruined any chance of friendship between them. Mr. Garrison grumbled about her spending time on outside projects, but since she completed all her assigned work and the extra income reflected well on his store, he did not forbid it. Flora was measuring out Calico one afternoon when the bell above the door jangled and Quincy walked in. Her heart lurched in her chest, but she kept her eyes on the fabric, counting out yards with meticulous care. "Miss Crawford," Quincy said, and his voice was carefully polite, "I came to see how the ranch project is coming along." "The fabric has arrived," Flora said, finally looking up at him. "I will begin work this week. It should be completed within the month as promised." "Good," Quincy said. "I appreciate your professionalism." The word stung like a slap, but Flora kept her expression neutral. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Foster?" Quincy opened his mouth as if to say something, then seemed to think better of it. "No, thank you." He left the store and Flora stood gripping the edge of the counter, feeling like she might shatter into pieces. Mr. Garrison watched the exchange with shrewd eyes. "Trouble in paradise?" he asked mockingly. "There was never any paradise," Flora said sharply. "Just a business arrangement which continues unchanged." She threw herself into the sewing with almost desperate intensity, working late into the night by lamplight until her eyes burned and her fingers ached. The curtains took shape under her hands, simple but elegant, the fabric a warm cream color that would soften the harsh sunlight without blocking it entirely. She embroidered small flowers along the edges, delicate desert blooms she had seen growing wild near the creek at the ranch. Mrs. Henley knocked on her door one evening, concern creasing her motherly face. "Child, you are going to work yourself to death. I can see the light under your door until all hours. What drives you so?" Flora set down her needle and rubbed her tired eyes. "I need to finish this project. I gave my word." "There is more to it than that," Mrs. Henley said shrewdly. "This would not have anything to do with a certain handsome rancher, would it? It does not matter, Flora said wearily. He was kind to me, and I repaid that kindness by being difficult and presumptuous. Now we are merely business associates, as we should have been from the start. Mrs. Henley sat down on the edge of the bed, her expression thoughtful. You know, I have lived in Calico for nearly 20 years, and I have watched Quincy Foster grow from a grieving boy trying to honor his father's memory into a fine man. He is choosy about who he lets close, probably because half the unmarried women in the county have thrown themselves at him. But I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you. Flora shook her head. You are mistaken. He was just being polite. I am many things, dear girl, but mistaken about matters of the heart is not one of them, Mrs. Henley said firmly. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Nothing, Flora said. I have nothing to offer a man like him. Hogwash, Mrs. Henley said inelegantly. You have yourself, and that is quite enough for the right person. The real question is whether you think you are worth fighting for. The words haunted Flora long after Mrs. Henley left. Was she worth fighting for? She had spent so long accepting the scraps life offered, keeping her head down and her expectations low, that the idea of reaching for something more felt impossibly foreign. But what if Mrs. Henley was right? What if Quincy had genuinely enjoyed her company, and she had pushed him away with her inability to believe anyone could want her? The curtains were finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule, folded carefully into a crate that Danny came to collect. Flora included instructions for hanging them and a note explaining the care they would need. She did not expect a response, and when 3 days passed with no word from Quincy, she told herself she had been right all along. Then, on Saturday evening, a knock came at the boarding house door. Mrs. Henley called up the stairs that Flora had a visitor, and she descended to find Quincy standing in the parlor, hat in hand and an expression on his face that made her pulse quicken. The curtains are beautiful, he said without preamble. More than I could have hoped for. You have real talent, Flora. Thank you, she said, clasping her hands together to keep them from trembling. I am glad you are pleased. Would you take a walk with me? Quincy asked. I know it is getting late, but I would like to talk to you and I would prefer some privacy. Flora glanced at Mrs. Henley, who made shooing motions with her hands. Go on, dear. I will leave the door unlocked for you. They walked through the cooling evening air, Calico's streets quiet now that most of the miners had gone to the saloons or home to their families. Quincy led her to the edge of town where the desert opened up, endless and star-filled, the sky a bowl of darkness pricked with light. I have been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks, Quincy said, his eyes on the horizon. About what you said at the ranch about being plain and having nothing to offer. Flora winced. I should not have said those things. It was inappropriate and self-pitying. No, Quincy said, turning to face her. You should not have to feel those things. Somewhere along the way, someone made you believe that your worth is tied to your appearance or your circumstances, and that is a lie. It is not a lie, Flora said, frustration creeping into her voice. It is reality. Beautiful women marry well, plain women make do. That is simply how the world works. Then the world is wrong, Quincy said with quiet intensity. And I am not going to let you keep believing it. Before Flora could respond, Quincy reached out and gently lifted her chin with his calloused fingers, forcing her to meet his eyes. Look at me, he said softly. Really look at me. Flora stared up at him, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. The moonlight silvered his features, highlighting the strong bones of his face, the curve of his mouth, the intensity in his green eyes. I see you, Flora Crawford, Quincy said, his thumb brushing along her jaw with infinite tenderness. I see your strength, your talent, your kindness. I see the way you carry yourself with dignity despite the hardships you have faced. I see the thoughtfulness in the way you listen, the creativity in your work, the quiet courage it takes to build a new life in a strange place." Tears pricked Flora's eyes, and she tried to look away, but Quincy's hand kept her face tilted toward his. "I see beauty," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Not the superficial kind that fades with time, but the deep beauty that comes from character and compassion. You captivated me from the moment I nearly ran you down in the street, not because of how you looked, but because of how you held yourself together when you were clearly exhausted and frightened. You fascinated me at dinner when you talked about sewing as if it were an art form. You moved me when you shared your losses without asking for pity." "Quincy," Flora whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. "I am not a man who plays games or makes idle compliments," Quincy said. "If I say you are beautiful, it is because you are. Your eyes are the color of rich earth, warm and deep. Your hair catches the light like polished mahogany. Your smile, when you let yourself give it freely, could light up the darkest night. But more than that, your spirit is beautiful, and that is what I have fallen in love with." Flora could not stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of joy rather than pain. "You love me?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I love you," Quincy confirmed. "I know it is fast, and I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You do not have to say it back. I am not asking you for anything except the chance to prove to you that you are worthy of love, of happiness, of every good thing life has to offer." Flora reached up and covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. "I do not know how to accept this," she said honestly. "I have spent so long believing I was not enough." "Then let me show you differently," Quincy said. "Let me court you properly. Let me take you to the church socials and the town dances. Let me bring you flowers and make you laugh. Let me spend time convincing you that you are everything I have been looking for." "What if I disappoint you?" Flora asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if you realize I am not who you think I am?" "That is not possible," Quincy said with absolute conviction. "Because I am not looking at you through the distorted lens you used to see yourself. I am seeing the truth of who you are, and it is magnificent." Flora felt something crack open in her chest, a lifetime of protective walls crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. "I would like that," she said, her voice trembling. "I would like very much for you to court me." Quincy's smile was like the sunrise, brilliant and warm and full of promise. "Then it is settled. I will pick you up tomorrow after church services and we will have lunch together. And Flora—" "Yes." "Thank you for giving me this chance. I will not squander it." He walked her back to the boarding house, keeping a respectful distance but radiating happiness that was almost tangible. At the door, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers up her arm. "Sleep well," he said. "Dream of good things." Flora climbed the stairs to her room in a daze, and when she caught sight of herself in the small mirror above her washstand, she hardly recognized the woman looking back. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed, and there was something different in the set of her shoulders, as if a burden had been lifted. Mrs. Henley was waiting in the hallway, not even pretending she had not been eavesdropping. "Well?" she demanded. "He is going to court me," Flora said, and saying the words out loud made them real. Mrs. Henley let out a whoop of delight that probably woke half the house. "I knew it. I told you, did I not tell you?" The next morning, Flora dressed for church with more care than usual, choosing her best dress and arranging her hair in soft waves rather than her usual severe braid. Quincy was waiting outside the church, and the look on his face when he saw her made her feel beautiful for the first time in her life. They sat together during the service, and Flora was acutely aware of the whispers and sidelong glances from the other townspeople. Mrs. Garrison looked particularly sour, and her daughter, a vapid blonde who had been pursuing Quincy for years, shot Flora a look of pure venom. But Quincy seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on Flora. After the service, they walked to the hotel restaurant, and Quincy held her chair with the same courtly manner he had shown at their first meal together. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared opinions on books neither had time to read and laughing over stories of their childhoods. "I was a terrible student," Quincy confessed. "Could not sit still long enough to learn anything. My teachers despaired of me." "I loved school," Flora said. "It was the one place where I felt like I could excel. My penmanship won awards." "I have appalling handwriting," Quincy admitted. "The hands tease me about it constantly. Maybe you could teach me to write more legibly." "I would be happy to try," Flora said, "though I make no promises about success." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Flora's life. Quincy came to town every Sunday after church, and they spent the afternoons walking, talking, and slowly learning the rhythms of each other's hearts. He brought her wildflowers picked from the desert, their hardy beauty a reflection of the land that sustained them. She made him a shirt in deep blue that matched his eyes, embroidering his initials over the pocket with meticulous care. Flora still worked at the general store, but now the tedium of mending was lightened by the anticipation of seeing Quincy. Mr. Garrison's attitude toward her shifted from dismissive to calculating, as if he was trying to figure out how to profit from her connection to one of the area's most successful ranchers. One Saturday evening, Quincy arrived in town unexpectedly, his face grave. Flora was helping Mrs. Henley with the dinner dishes when he knocked on the door, and her heart sank at his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "Can we talk?" Quincy asked. Privately, they went to the parlor, and Quincy paced the small space like a caged animal. Flora waited, her hands twisted together, fearing that he had come to tell her he had made a mistake, that he had realized she was not worth the trouble after all. "I had a visitor at the ranch today," Quincy said finally. "Margaret Tanner and her mother." Flora knew the name. Margaret was the daughter of a wealthy mine owner, beautiful and accomplished, exactly the kind of woman someone like Quincy should marry. "They came to inform me that Margaret has accepted my proposal of marriage," Quincy continued, his voice tight with anger. "Apparently her mother has been telling people that we are engaged." Flora felt the floor drop out from under her. "Are you?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "No," Quincy said vehemently. "I have never proposed to Margaret Tanner. I have never so much as hinted at an interest in courting her. This is a complete fabrication designed to force my hand." "Why would she do that?" Flora asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Because her mother wants to secure a connection to my ranch," Quincy said bitterly. "The mines are starting to play out, and the Tanners are looking for a way to maintain their status. Mrs. Tanner probably figured that if she spread the rumor widely enough, I would marry Margaret rather than cause a scandal by denying it." "What are you going to do?" Flora asked. Quincy stopped pacing and came to sit beside her on the settee. He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "I am going to tell the truth. I am going to make it very clear to everyone in Calico that I am courting you and only you, with the intention of asking you to marry me when the time is right." Flora's breath caught. "Quincy, you do not have to do that. The Tanners are powerful. They could make trouble for you." "Let them try," Quincy said fiercely. "I am not going to let anyone dictate who I love or how I live my life. But I need to know, Flora, do you want this? Do you want me? Because if you do, I will fight for us against anyone and anything." Flora looked into his eyes and saw absolute certainty there, a conviction that she mattered, that they mattered. All her life she had taken the path of least resistance, accepting what was offered rather than reaching for what she wanted. But Quincy made her want to be brave. "I want you," she said clearly. "I want us, and I am willing to fight for it too." Quincy kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that promised everything words could not convey. It was Flora's first kiss, and it felt like coming home to a place she had never been but had always longed for. The scandal broke on Monday. Mrs. Tanner went to the church ladies' social and loudly lamented Flora's shameless pursuit of an engaged man. The story spread through Calico like wildfire, and by the time Flora arrived at work, Mr. Garrison was waiting with a thunderous expression. "I cannot have this kind of scandal associated with my store," he announced. "You are dismissed, Miss Crawford. Pack your things and leave." Flora felt the familiar wash of helplessness, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "I have done nothing wrong," she said firmly. "Mr. Foster is not engaged to anyone, and his courtship of me has been entirely proper." "That is not what Mrs. Tanner says," Mr. Garrison retorted, "and her word carries more weight than yours or some ranchers. Now get out before I have the sheriff remove you." Flora gathered her few belongings from the back room, her mind racing. Without employment, she could not afford to stay at the boarding house. She would have to leave Calico, return to San Francisco and the hopeless poverty she had tried to escape. She was walking down the street, her sewing basket clutched to her chest when a wagon pulled up beside her. Quincy jumped down, his face a mask of fury. "I just heard," he said. "Garrison fired you," Flora nodded, not trusting her voice. "Come to the ranch," Quincy said. "Stay there." "Not in the house," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "I have got a small cabin that belonged to my father's foreman. It is empty and yours for as long as you need it. You can do your sewing work from there, and I will make sure you have everything you need." "I cannot," Flora said. "That would ruin your reputation as much as mine." "I do not give a damn about my reputation," Quincy said. "But if it makes you feel better, I will hire you as the ranch cook and housekeeper. That makes it a legitimate business arrangement." "I am not a very good cook," Flora warned. "Neither am I," Quincy said with a crooked smile. "Between us, we will figure it out. Please, Flora, let me help you." Flora thought about her options, which were essentially none. "All right," she said. "Thank you." The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace and a window that looked out over the desert. Quincy helped her settle in, and by evening she had transformed the bare space into something approaching cozy. The ranch hands treated her with respectful courtesy, and Danny appointed himself her unofficial guardian, always appearing to carry heavy loads or help with tasks that required more muscle than she possessed. Flora threw herself into her new role, learning to cook simple meals that the men devoured with gratifying enthusiasm. She kept the main house clean, did laundry, and continued her sewing work on the side, taking orders that Quincy brought back from town. She saved every penny she earned, determined to regain her independence as soon as possible. But living in such close proximity to Quincy tested her resolve. Every morning she cooked breakfast while he shaved, the domestic intimacy of it both comforting and unsettling. Every evening they sat on the porch and talked as the sun set, and Flora found herself falling deeper in love with this man who had upended her carefully managed expectations. "The Tanners are still spreading rumors," Quincy told her one night, about 6 weeks after she had moved to the ranch. "Apparently I have you hidden away out here as my mistress," Flora flinched. "Maybe I should leave, go back to San Francisco." "No," Quincy said flatly. "Running away would not help anything, and besides, I need you here." He paused, then added quietly, "I love you here." "I love you too," Flora said, the words coming more easily now. She had said them before, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, but each time still felt like a revelation. Quincy moved closer on the porch swing, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "Marry me," he said. "Not someday in the future, but now, tomorrow. Let me make you my wife and put an end to all these rumors." Flora's heart hammered against her ribs. "Are you sure? The Tanners will not like it." "The Tanners can go to hell," Quincy said inelegantly. "I am asking you because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build this ranch into something we can be proud of and raise children who know they are loved. I want everything with you, Flora." Flora turned in his arms, cupping his face in her hands. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They rode into town the next morning and found the minister, a mild-mannered man named Reverend Howell who had always been kind to Flora. He agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon, and Quincy sent Danny to fetch Mrs. Henley and the ranch hands as witnesses. Flora wore her best dress and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers. The ceremony was simple, conducted in the small church with only their closest friends present. When Reverend Howell pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I love you, Mrs. Foster," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too," Flora replied, marveling at how right it felt to say. The news of their marriage spread through Calico within hours, and the reaction was mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them, while others muttered about unseemly haste and social climbing. Mrs. Tanner arrived at the ranch 2 days later, her face mottled with rage. "You have made a terrible mistake, Mr. Foster," she hissed, refusing to dismount from her carriage. "My daughter could have given you connections, prestige, everything a man of your station needs." "I already have everything I need," Quincy said calmly, his arm around Flora's waist. "I have a woman I love and who loves me, and that is worth more than all the prestige in California." "You will regret this," Mrs. Tanner spat. "Mark my words." She left in a cloud of dust, and Quincy turned to Flora with a rueful smile. "Well, I think it is safe to say we have burned that bridge." "Are you sorry?" Flora asked quietly. "Not for a single second," Quincy said, pulling her close. "You are worth any price." Their first months of marriage were an adjustment as they learned to live together, to navigate the small irritations and profound joys of shared life. Flora discovered that Quincy snored when he was overtired and had a tendency to track mud through the house. Quincy learned that Flora needed quiet in the mornings to gather her thoughts, and that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide when it came to matters of principle. But they also discovered the deep satisfaction of partnership, of working together toward common goals. Flora took over the ranch accounts, her neat penmanship and head for figures bringing order to Quincy's chaotic record-keeping. Quincy taught her to ride, patiently guiding her through her fear until she could gallop silver across the desert with confidence and joy. They made the house into a home, Flora's curtains and cushions softening the harsh masculine edges, Quincy's books and riding gear giving it a lived-in warmth. They hosted dinners for the ranch hands, creating a family out of the collection of men who worked the land alongside them. Winter came to the desert, bringing cold nights and occasional rain that turned the parched earth green with new growth. Flora discovered she was pregnant on a morning in late January, the realization dawning as she lost her breakfast for the 3rd day in a row. Quincy's joy was almost comical in its intensity, and he immediately became absurdly overprotective, insisting she rest more and work less. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Flora protested as he tried to prevent her from lifting a pot of stew. "You are carrying precious cargo," Quincy said stubbornly. "Our child. Let me take care of you," Flora softened, seeing the wonder in his eyes. "I love you," she said, kissing him gently. "And I will try to be more careful, but you have to promise not to hover quite so much." "I will try," Quincy said, though they both knew it was a promise he could not keep. The baby arrived on a blazing hot day in August, after a labor that left Flora exhausted and Quincy pale with fear. But when Reverend Howell's wife, who served as midwife, placed the squalling infant in Flora's arms, everything else faded away. "A boy," Mrs. Howell announced, "strong and healthy." Quincy stared at his son with an expression of awe, reaching out to touch the tiny fist with one gentle finger. "He is perfect," he whispered. They named him Thomas after Quincy's father, and he became the center of their world. Flora marveled at how fiercely she loved this small person, at how her heart seemed to expand to contain impossible depths of feeling. Quincy was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, singing off key lullabies that somehow always soothed him to sleep. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Quincy's reputation for quality horses spread, and buyers came from across California to purchase his stock. Flora's sewing business grew as well, her skill becoming known throughout the region, and she hired 2 young women from town to help with the orders. They had 3 more children, daughters born in 1888 and 1890, and another son in 1893. Their house rang with laughter and the chaos of family life, and Flora sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was real, that she had gone from lonely seamstress to beloved wife and mother. On their 10th anniversary, Quincy took her riding out to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. The ranch had grown to encompass several hundred acres, the corrals filled with horses, the house expanded to accommodate their growing family. "You remember the night I told you I loved you?" Quincy asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the sunset. "Every detail," Flora said. "It was the night my life truly began." "Mine too," Quincy said. "I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions of building something without really understanding why. You gave me purpose. You gave me worth," Flora said softly. "You taught me that I was enough exactly as I was." Quincy turned her to face him, his green eyes as intense as they had been that first night. "You were always enough. I just helped you see what was already there." He kissed her as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, and Flora felt the same flutter in her chest that she had experienced at their first kiss. Time had not dimmed the love between them, only deepened it, adding layers of shared experience and mutual respect. They rode back to the house as stars began to emerge, the windows glowing with lamplight and the sounds of their children's voices drifting on the evening air. Danny, now the foreman, called a greeting from the barn, and Silver whinnied a welcome from her stall. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," Flora said as they dismounted. "This is everything I always knew I needed," Quincy replied, taking her hand. "And it all started because I was riding too fast through town and nearly trampled an extraordinary woman." Flora laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "The best accident of my life." Thomas came running out to meet them, now a sturdy boy of 9 with his father's green eyes and his mother's thoughtful nature. He was followed by his sisters, 6-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Alice, both of whom had inherited Quincy's dark hair and Flora's warm smile. The baby, 2-year-old William, toddled after them on chubby legs, calling for his mama. Flora scooped William up, her heart swelling with love for this family they had built together. Quincy gathered the girls in his arms, and Thomas stood close, completing the circle. "Inside, all of you," Flora said, herding them toward the house. "It is past bedtime." The evening routine was familiar and comforting. Baths and bedtime stories, prayers and tucking in, kisses goodnight and promises of tomorrow. When the last child was settled, Flora and Quincy retreated to their bedroom, the one sanctuary of quiet in their busy household. "Tired?" Quincy asked, brushing her hair with long, gentle strokes. "Content," Flora corrected. "There is a difference." They lay in bed together, Flora's head on Quincy's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was her favorite time of day, these quiet moments when the world narrowed to just the two of them. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had not come to Calico?" Quincy asked. Flora considered. "Sometimes. I think I would have survived the way I always had, but I would not have lived, not really. I would have existed in the shadows, never knowing what it felt like to be loved, to be valued, to matter." "You always mattered," Quincy said fiercely. "Even before I met you, even before you knew your own worth, you mattered." "Maybe," Flora conceded, "but it took you to make me believe it." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms the way they had every night since their wedding. Outside, the desert breathed its ancient rhythms, stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance, the land stretching away in all directions, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. But inside the house at Triple F Ranch, there was only warmth and love and the promise of tomorrow. The years continued to unfold like the pages of a well-loved book. Thomas grew into a young man who shared his father's gift with horses, and Emma developed a talent for drawing that covered the walls of the house with her artwork. Alice had her mother's skill with a needle and thread, and William showed every sign of becoming the charmer of the family. Flora watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of time's passage. She was 41 now, her hair showing threads of silver, fine lines bracketing her eyes and mouth. But when she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she no longer saw the plain, forgettable woman she had once believed herself to be. She saw someone who was loved, someone who had built a life of meaning and purpose. Quincy, at 43, had gray at his temples and a weathered quality to his face, but he was still the same man who had lifted her chin and made her believe in her own worth. He still looked at her with the same warmth, still reached for her hand when they walked, still made her feel cherished every single day. One afternoon, in the spring of 1896, Flora was working in her sewing room when Mrs. Henley came to visit, now in her 70s, but still spry and sharp-eyed. They had maintained their friendship over the years, and Flora valued the older woman's wisdom and humor. "I heard something interesting in town," Mrs. Henley said over tea and biscuits. "Margaret Tanner is getting divorced. Married some banker from San Francisco, and apparently it did not work out." Flora felt a pang of sympathy. "That is unfortunate. I hope she finds happiness eventually." "You are more charitable than I would be," Mrs. Henley said. "She and her mother tried to ruin you." "They failed," Flora said simply. "And holding on to bitterness would only poison my own happiness. I have everything I ever wanted. Why would I waste energy on old grudges?" Mrs. Henley smiled. "You have become wise, my dear. And speaking of wisdom, I wanted to tell you something. Do you remember that first night you arrived in Calico, how lost and frightened you looked?" Flora nodded. "I remember feeling like I had reached the end of the world. I almost did not offer you a room," Mrs. Henley confessed. "You looked like trouble, like someone running from something. But there was something in your eyes, a determination to survive despite everything, and it reminded me of myself at your age. I am glad I took the chance." "So am I," Flora said warmly. "You gave me a home when I desperately needed one, and you have been a dear friend ever since." They talked through the afternoon, sharing memories and laughter, and when Mrs. Henley left, Flora sat in her sewing room surrounded by the evidence of her life. The curtains she had made for the ranch house, the clothes she had sewn for her children, the quilts she had pieced together from scraps, each one telling a story. She heard the sound of hoofbeats and looked out the window to see Quincy riding in, Thomas beside him on his own horse. They had been checking the fence lines, a never-ending task on a ranch this size. Father and son dismounted with the same easy grace, already deep in conversation about something. Flora went to meet them, and Quincy's face lit up when he saw her, the way it always did. He pulled her close and kissed her soundly, ignoring Thomas's exaggerated groan of embarrassment. "Get used to it, son," Quincy said with a grin. "When you find the right woman, you will understand." Thomas shook his head and headed to the barn, muttering about parents and their mushiness. Flora and Quincy watched him go, then turned to each other with shared amusement. "He is going to break hearts someday," Flora predicted. "Just like his mother broke mine," Quincy said. "I did no such thing," Flora protested. "You did," Quincy insisted. "You broke it wide open and filled it with more love than I knew was possible. Best thing that ever happened to me." They walked toward the house hand in hand, their steps matched after years of walking together. The sun was warm on Flora's face, and she could hear the girls playing in the yard, their laughter bright as bells. This was her life, this collection of ordinary moments strung together like beads on a thread, each one precious because they were shared with the people she loved. That evening, after the children were in bed, Flora and Quincy sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. It was their ritual, this quiet time together, and Flora cherished it as much as she had on their wedding night. "I have been thinking about expanding the operation," Quincy said. "Maybe buying the Henderson place when old man Henderson finally decides to retire. It would give us access to better water and more grazing land." "That sounds ambitious," Flora said. "Can we manage it?" "With you by my side, I can manage anything," Quincy said. "You are the smartest person I know, Flora. Your business sense has made us more successful than I ever dreamed." Flora leaned into him, comfortable in his embrace. "We make a good team." "The best," Quincy agreed. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only 3 or 4 times," Flora said with a smile, "but I never get tired of hearing it." "I love you," Quincy said, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, I love you, I love you. There, now you are all caught up." Flora laughed, the sound carrying across the desert night. "I love you too." More than words can express. They sat in comfortable silence, the swing creaking gently, the night air cool and sweet. Flora thought about the girl she had been, stepping off the stage in Calico with nothing but fear and determination. She thought about all the moments that had led her here. Quincy's kindness, his persistence, his unwavering belief in her worth. She thought about the night he had lifted her chin and told her she was beautiful, how those words had cracked open the shell she had built around her heart. She had not believed him then, not really, but over the years, his love had slowly taught her to see herself through his eyes. "You ever regret it?" Flora asked quietly. "Marrying someone like me instead of someone who could have brought you wealth or status?" Quincy pulled back to look at her, his expression serious in the starlight. "Flora Foster, after all these years, after all the times I have shown you and told you, do you still doubt how I feel?" "No," Flora said quickly. "I know you love me. I just wonder sometimes if you ever think about what might have been." "What might have been would have been a pale imitation of what I have," Quincy said firmly. "You are my partner, my love, my best friend. You have given me children who fill my heart with joy. You have made our house a home. You have built a business that supports our family. You have stood beside me through drought and debt, through hard times and good. What more could any man want?" "You make it sound so simple," Flora said. "Because it is simple," Quincy said. "I love you, you love me. We have built a life together. That is all that matters." Flora kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "Come on," Quincy said, standing and pulling her to her feet. Let us go to bed. Tomorrow is another long day." They walked inside together, closing the door on the night. The house was dark and quiet, their children sleeping peacefully in their beds. Flora paused at each doorway, looking in on her babies, now not so much babies anymore. In their own room, she and Quincy prepared for bed with the comfortable intimacy of long marriage. When they finally climbed under the covers, Quincy pulled her close, her back to his chest, his arm around her waist. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what?" Flora asked. "For saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on me, for building this life with me." "I should be thanking you," Flora said. "You changed everything for me." "We changed everything for each other," Quincy corrected. "That is what love does." Flora drifted off to sleep feeling safe and cherished, dreams filled with golden light and the sound of laughter. When morning came, she woke to find Quincy already up, standing at the window looking out over the ranch. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, joining him. "The future," Quincy said, slipping his arm around her waist. "Thomas will take over the ranch someday, and the girls will make their own lives. We will grow old together, you and I, watching our grandchildren play in the yard where our children played." "That sounds perfect," Flora said. "It does it not?" Quincy agreed. "But whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, we will face them together. That is what we promised, and that is what we will do." The years proved him right. They faced challenges, economic downturns, and droughts that tested their resources and their faith. They weathered Thomas's brief rebellion when he announced he wanted to be a lawyer instead of a rancher, supporting him even as they wondered who would take over the land they had worked so hard to build. They celebrated when Emma married a teacher from San Francisco and moved to the city, bringing a new perspective to the family. They cried together when Mrs. Henley passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, leaving Flora bereft of her oldest friend and confidante. They rejoiced when Alice won a prize for her quilting at the state fair, her work recognized for its artistry and craftsmanship. They watched William grow into a young man with his father's way with horses and his mother's gentle heart. And when he announced his intention to expand the ranch's breeding program, they handed him the reins with confidence. Through it all, through every triumph and tragedy, Quincy and Flora stood together. Their love, forged in the heat of the desert and tempered by the years, remained the bedrock of their lives. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party that filled the ranch house to bursting. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, and the celebration lasted long into the night. When everyone had finally gone home and the house was quiet again, Flora and Quincy stood in the yard under a canopy of stars. 25 years, Flora marveled. "How did we get so lucky?" "I do not think luck had much to do with it," Quincy said. "I think we chose each other, and we kept choosing each other every single day." "I would choose you 1,000 times over," Flora said. "Only 1,000, Quincy teased. "I would choose you 1,000,000. Flora laughed and swatted his arm, "Always trying to one-up me." "Always," Quincy agreed, pulling her into a dance even though there was no music. They swayed together in the starlight, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization born of years of partnership. "You know what the best part of my life has been?" Flora asked as they danced. "What?" Quincy asked. "This, right here, dancing with you under the stars, waking up next to you every morning, watching you with our children, building a life alongside you, all of it. Every single moment. Even the hard parts," Quincy asked. "Especially the hard parts," Flora said. "Because they taught us that we could face anything as long as we faced it together." Quincy stopped dancing and cupped her face in his hands, the same gesture he had made all those years ago when he lifted her chin and told her she was beautiful. "I love you, Flora Foster." You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Flora whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself. Thank you for believing in me when I had no faith. Thank you for loving me." They kissed under the stars, the desert wind whispering around them, and Flora felt the same rush of joy she had felt at their first kiss, their wedding kiss, every kiss in between. This was love, she thought. Not the fairy tale kind that solved all problems with magic, but the real kind built on choice and commitment and unwavering faith in each other. As they walked back to the house, hand in hand, Flora looked back at the land they had built together. The Triple F Ranch stood as a testament to their partnership, a legacy they would pass on to their children and grandchildren. But more than that, it was a testament to the transformative power of love, to the way one person's belief could change another person's entire life. Flora had come to Calico a broken woman who thought herself unworthy of love. She had been wrong. Quincy had shown her that worth was not about beauty or status or any of the superficial things the world valued. It was about character, kindness, and the courage to keep going even when the path was hard. And in learning to love herself through Quincy's eyes, Flora had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. She had built a business, raised a family, and created a home filled with love and laughter. She had become someone who mattered, not because of what she looked like or what she owned, but because of who she was and what she chose to do with her life. Years later, when Flora was in her 60s and Quincy in his mid-60s, they sat on that same porch swing, now worn smooth by decades of use. Their children were grown with families of their own, and grandchildren filled the house on holidays and special occasions. Thomas had surprised everyone by going to law school and then coming home to Calico, where he combined ranching with a practice serving the local farmers and ranchers. He had married a school teacher named Sarah, and they had given Flora and Quincy 4 grandchildren. Emma and her husband had 3 children and lived in San Francisco, but they visited every summer, filling the ranch with city sophistication and new ideas. Alice had married William's best friend and settled on a neighboring ranch, her quilts now sought after across the state. William had never married, content with his horses and his role as favorite uncle to his many nieces and nephews. "We did all right, did we not?" Quincy said, his hair now white, his face deeply lined but his eyes still that same vivid green. "We did better than all right," Flora said, her own hair silver, her hands gnarled from decades of needlework. "We did magnificently." "Do you ever think about that first night in Calico?" Quincy asked. "When I nearly ran you down, all the time," Flora admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how certain I was that my life was essentially over. And then you appeared, and everything changed." "You changed everything," Quincy corrected. "You made me understand what love really meant. You gave me a purpose beyond just building a ranch. You made me a better man." "We made each other better," Flora said. "That is what true partnership does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had worked for decades to build and maintain. In the distance, they could hear the horses in the corrals, the sound of William talking to them in the gentle voice he used with all animals. "I am grateful," Quincy said suddenly, "for every moment, every challenge, every triumph, every single day I have gotten to spend with you." "Me too," Flora said, tears pricking her eyes. "I was so certain I was unworthy of love, and you proved me wrong every single day." "You were never unworthy," Quincy said fiercely, "even now, even after all these years. You were always deserving of every good thing, I just helped you see it." Flora leaned into him and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. They stayed that way as the stars emerged, two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other through all the years of their lives. "You know what I wish?" Flora said softly. "What?" Quincy asked. "That every person who feels invisible, who feels unworthy, who feels like they do not matter, finds someone who sees them the way you saw me. Someone who lifts their chin and makes them believe they are beautiful." "That is a good wish," Quincy said. "But you know what makes it even better? You have done that for so many people yourself. The young women you have hired and trained, the children you have loved, the community you have served. You have shown them that worth comes from within, and that has made all the difference." Flora had not thought of it that way, but she supposed he was right. Over the years, she had employed dozens of young women, teaching them sewing skills that allowed them to support themselves. She had shown kindness to the outcasts and misfits, the ones others overlooked. She had tried to pass on the gift Quincy had given her, the knowledge that everyone deserved to be seen, to be valued, to matter. "We have had a good life," Flora said. "The best life," Quincy agreed. They sat on the porch until the cold drove them inside, and they climbed into the bed they had shared for nearly 50 years. Quincy pulled Flora close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Quincy replied. "Always have, always will." Flora fell asleep feeling safe and loved, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. When morning came, they would face it together, the way they had faced every morning for the past 5 decades. And that, Flora thought as she drifted into dreams, was the greatest gift of all. Not wealth or status or beauty, but the simple, profound joy of being truly known and deeply loved by another human being. Quincy had given her that gift all those years ago when he lifted her chin and proved her wrong about herself, and she had been proving him right ever since. Their love story was not a fairy tale with magic and miracles. It was something better. A real story about real people who chose each other and built a life through hard work, commitment, and unwavering faith in each other. It was a story about discovering worth, about learning to see beauty in unexpected places, about the transformative power of genuine love. And it was a story that would continue in their children and grandchildren, in the values they had instilled, and the example they had set. Long after Flora and Quincy were gone, the Triple F Ranch would stand as a monument to what two people could build when they loved each other truly and well. But for now, in this moment, they were together, and that was all that mattered. Flora closed her eyes and smiled, grateful beyond words for the rancher who had seen past her plain exterior to the beauty within, grateful for the life they had built together, grateful for every precious moment of their shared journey. This was love, she thought. This was everything. And it was more than enough.